It's 2022. Wages have stagnated, the profit share of GDP is at a record high, the gender pay gap is still here, insecure work is still here. How should we deal with it? Job summit. So on the 1st and 2nd of September, the government is seeking to bring together employee groups like Qantas, trade unions and political parties from across the aisle to grapple with these huge problems. And this is the first time in years that something like this has happened. So it's a pretty big deal. All right, so wages, Greg, what's been happening?
In the past decade, wages growth has continually been slowing. And even though it's picked up a bit in the last sort of year or so, as we all know, what also has picked up is inflation. Costs of living and everything has absolutely exploded. And as a result, our real wages, the ability to buy things with what we earn, has plummeted. It's gone back 10 years.
10 years?
10 years, where you can now buy with what you earn about the same amount of things that you could have bought with what you earned back in 2012. So that's essentially saying that your standard of living now is the same as it was 10 years ago, which is not a good thing. Standard of living is meant to improve, and it had been improving. It had been improving slowly over the past decade, slower than it normally does, but it's just absolutely plummeted faster than, in fact, ever in any sort of Australian records in the past year. And it's set to keep on going down as inflation keeps rising because wages aren't keeping up. And if the Reserve Bank predictions are correct, by the end of next year, by the end of 2023, we won't be back at 2012 sort of levels, we'll be back at 2008 levels. So that'd be 15 years lost of living standards, which is a massive issue.
And so is this just workers dealing with this, or is this everyone in the economy?
You might be shocked to discover that actually profits are not going down in the same way that real wages are going. Profits are absolutely exploding. The Bureau of Statistics, when it was looking at the last GDP figures, made a nice little sort of swipe at companies by saying that Australian companies have benefited from rising prices, and then also had the line that wages are not keeping up with inflation. So it's what we're really seeing is profits normally should be keeping up with wages. They should sort of go up. We want companies to make profits because notionally that means they can then pay workers more. But what we've seen in the last 5 years and very much in the last 12 months to 24 months, profits explode, real wages not explode.
So we know that wages are bad, but is anything still happening with the gender pay gap, Greg?
Yeah, it's a massive issue that is just ongoing. And the real thing that I think people need to realise is it's not just this argument of, are women getting paid the same amount for doing the same work as men are doing? Because obviously you can't discriminate against women, that's illegal. It's a lot more complex than that. And what we see from, for example, the latest taxation data, which looks at what people earn over the entire year, we see that in 91% of every single occupation, men have a higher median salary than do women. And that's not because they're getting paid more per hour, it's because they're doing more hours. Men are more likely to be full-time, women are more likely to be part-time or casual. Men are more likely to get the promotions, more likely to be given more responsibility that gets greater pay. So it's not just about, who's getting paid the same amount for doing the same work. It's that structural factors in there that always see generally men getting the better paying jobs and women being thought, you're probably going to have a child, so we won't promote you, or you probably want to get home and make dinner or something like that, so we won't give you the full-time job, or we won't give you the overtime. It's a really structural problem that needs to be fixed, that needs to be addressed. And it's something that really needs businesses, as much as sort of unions pushing on this, it needs businesses to be aware of it and to face up to these problems.
So if we need to bring together businesses and trade unions to address something as big as the gender pay gap, some sort of job summit or event might actually help us deal with this.
And as we know, one of the underlying issues with the gender pay gap is that women are much more likely to be doing insecure work.
Yeah, absolutely. So insecure work is actually one of the other problems that the Job Summit is seeking to address. It is an issue primarily because women do tend to sit in this sort of work. So this is work that is temporary or impermanent or maybe short-term contracts all the way up to things like working for a gig economy company like Uber. And so the sort of issue with the rise of this insecure work is that it really can limit your economic mobility. It limits your capacity to get things like bank loans or mortgages, and it can really affect essentially your economic health. So we've seen insecure work absolutely decimate some particular sectors, in particular higher education. We've seen that be a huge, huge problem. And so this is another one of those sort of major cornerstone issues that the Job Summit will try and address.
And it's not just being a casual worker. A lot of this, as we're certainly seeing in the education sector, are people being on short-term contracts. You might have sick leave, but you only got 6 months, and that can, as Lily was saying, make it really hard to get a home loan, and it really makes it hard for you to be able to plan ahead, because every 6 months or even every 12 months if you're lucky, you're trying to get another contract. So you're more worried about actually just getting more work rather than actually hoping to get better pay. And one thing that is surrounding all of this, Lily, is enterprise bargaining.
So what we're talking about here is a group of employees or workers in an enterprise, which might be a business or a employer, coming together and negotiating with their boss for their pay and conditions. And this lifts pay and conditions essentially because there's strength in numbers. So enterprise bargaining is the way that we collectively bargain for our wages and conditions, and it has collapsed in Australia. It has gone from reasonable coverage down to about 1 in 7 workers on an enterprise agreement. And this is a major issue because it is the way that you can actually lift your pay and conditions. So we see how this connects to things like wages stagnating. We see how this connects to the rise of insecure contracts because you can't protect yourself against them. And we also see this with the gender pay gap as well.
One of the things about enterprise bargaining agreements is that employers kind of hate them. And the reason they hate them is because enterprise bargaining agreements deliver better wages consistently and have done for 20, 30 years since they were brought in. And what we're seeing now is employers trying to essentially undermine and, if you're really blunt, destroy the enterprise bargaining system.
Yeah, that has been something in the lead up to the Job Summit. We're sort of seeing this tension arise where unions and other employee interest groups are really pushing for this expansion of enterprise bargaining. They want to bring more people in and lift more people out of wages up. Whereas employee groups sort of seem to be a lot more interested in, I would say, weakening our enterprise bargaining system.
So it needs to be fixed. Lily, how do we go about fixing the enterprise bargaining system?
So this is the major question. And so I think the looming answer is that we need to expand enterprise bargaining to multiple employers. So what this means is enterprise bargaining as it stands right now is one group of workers with one employer, but this doesn't really reflect what businesses are set up like today. So this doesn't really reflect things like how franchises are set up or how supply chains work or even how an entire sector might work. And so if we broaden the coverage, then it means that it's easier for workers to come together and to get an agreement essentially between more people. So we take something, for example, like a supermarket where you might have people in the store are being hired by different companies to people who are delivering the food compared to people who are unloading the food, and even you might have labour hire contractors as well working in the store. So you've got all these different employers essentially operating out of the same sort of business, but they're all able to go and negotiate different terms on different levels, and that really fractures the workplace and that can sort of lower wages a bit. So we've got a lot of problems on the table, but we also have some major opportunities here. And I think the biggest of all is that we actually have the people who could make a change to this in the room together. So we'll definitely be watching, and you can tune in afterwards and we can have some analysis on how we think it all went.